the Lord has made it to where we will not be able to get that kind of perspective on our own, because that is just, we are finite creatures. And so he has made it to where we need him. We need others. And so you've got to get perspective. So whether it's a Patterson type of guide, it's whoever you happen to know who's an incredible life coach or a counselor or a pastor, whoever it is, you need other people speaking into that and giving you that perspective.
Every single individual has a story to tell, and they're great stories that need to be heard.
I want every listener to know they have the ability to change the world.
Welcome to the 1720 podcast.
What's up, Mount Movers? Welcome back to the 1720 podcast. We're honored to have Kent Rabalais.
That's right.
Yes!
Say it the right way.
Rebel ass?
That's also acceptable.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at all the notes and the bullet points, but the only thing I can think of is don't butcher his last name.
Yeah.
Don't butcher his last name.
You nailed it.
Yeah,
That's
but
great.
Thanks for joining us, man. This is one of Stewie's childhood friends that they kept looping in the story, and he's got some real stuff to bring up that I think is going to hit home for a lot of listeners. And typically we do elevator pitch to start this, but you've known Stewie since like the fourth grade, so why don't we kick it off with maybe a story that either hits home or funny or whatever you got, man. Open floor on that.
So excited.
You can tell the story, but I think since the fourth grade, we've known each other, but also like I commonly say between you and Jonathan, y'all are my oldest friends. Yeah. Like I even talked with Mom about it over the weekend. I was like, name somebody I've known for longer than Kent. Yeah. And Mom's like, I don't know anybody. And I was like, what about? She's like, no, so like my oldest friend.
It's the same for me, too.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable.
It is remarkable.
So here's a story. It's still known in Kirbyville, where we were both at the time. Stewart went later on to lore at Hardin Jefferson High School. But this was at Kirbyville in junior high. And playing basketball against Kuntz Lions, which are Kuntz's incredible basketball program. And I was getting my first start. Coach Bush put me in. And here was the thing. I drove up into kind of the corner, and Stewart would post up, and I would throw huge lob passes right over the waiting hands of the defender, right into Stewart's hands. He'd turn and get a two. And that happened like 3 times in a row. Crowds going nuts.
I don't remember the story.
No. I still vividly remember it. And then finally I go down and hit this big shot, and like everybody's going nuts. Granted, like I was the end of the bench. Like, and this was like Coach Bush is like being nice to the end of the bench dude getting to play. And so it was like, and then it was Kuntz, right? Because they were incredible. They went on to win state championships and kind of like Hardin Jefferson that way. And so I always remember the time when Stewart helped me out with basketball, where just caught my beautiful lob passes and just punked some people. So
I don't remember that story at all.
Yeah, I thought you'd appreciate that.
I do appreciate that because it dovetails.
Because it's a basketball
It's a
reference.
basketball story. If you're playing podcast bingo, you're checking boxes already.
Fast forward to today, and he can't hit a K-cup into the garbage can if his life depended on it.
Not 30 minutes ago, I get a K-cup out of the coffee maker and I turn to like fling it into a enormous 55-gallon.
Kobe!
Yeah, come up like 2 feet short. Kev walks around the corner. He's like, yeah, basketball, huh? Oh, man, come on.
There you go.
Come on. That's a good story. Yeah. Dude, we played a lot of basketball.
We did. That was a thing back then, all the time, especially me, you, and Jonathan. So it was good.
We need to catch up with Jonathan.
We do.
All right. So I'll get us back to.
Yeah.
That's a good story, by the way. Thanks. Get us back to who's Kent Rabalais.
Yes. So, man, I think at a high level, I heard I've heard a few people say this where I'm 43 now, and so you're like, man, condensing everything. But I grew up in a small town in Southeast Texas, which we've referenced, Kirbyville, and I think that's where my creativity and dreaming started, because there's not a lot to do out in those spaces. You play basketball, dream, and so
meth.
Meth. Unfortunately, that's super sad. Friends that you're like, man, it really got them.
Yeah.
So, and then my parents divorced at an early age. I'm sure we'll talk about that some, where, I didn't have a memory of them married. So it was just Mom pretty much raised me, and then I would see my dad every other weekend. So big part of my story, and really went through a lot of depression. I've always been a bit prone to melancholy. Went through a depressive season, and then started hanging out with some friends who invited me to a revival in Kirbyville. And that's when I became a believer, when I first heard the gospel of Jesus. And it was incredible. It was just life-giving and blew me up. And I say I had this honeymoon time with the Lord where I realized, okay, it's not anything I do. I need Jesus in every way. And then went to college at Baylor University in Waco, Sickle Bears, and man, just truly never got involved in a church and really drifted and went prodigal is probably the best way I can say what happened there. Yeah. Also at that time got married to my high school sweetheart when I was 19. And so there was a lot that happened in college. Really began a love for film and storytelling through a class I took there at Baylor. Went to LA for a while and worked on a screenplay that got a lot of great reviews and movement about the 1900 storm of Galveston. Mm-hmm. And man, all of a sudden it was like my dreams were about to come true. If I could see the Oscar statue, and then everything fell apart. And moved back to Texas, went through a divorce, and really hit rock bottom. And then the Lord was just kind and gracious to call me back to himself. True prodigal story. Had a friend call me, invited me to a little church at the time called the Village Church in Highland Village. And it was March of 06. And I walked up the steps of the village in March of 06, and it was like, welcome home. And it felt like I'd been there like 40 years, and it was day one of 40 years. And so went through a lot of counseling, and man, my ex-wife got remarried after the divorce we had, and so I couldn't reconcile that. So had a desire to marry again, and got married again in 08. And so we'll talk, I'm sure, about that too. And then so that was big. And then professionally, I kind of gave up the film side, and the Lord was like, no, you're not done with it. You just perverted something that I gave you a passion for and a gift for. So started making a lot of short films at an agency called Pursuant for nonprofits like Notre Dame and American Cancer and American Heart. And the Lord just really redeemed, that whole storytelling side. And then started a couple of companies. Ended up in 2013 going to the Village Church to be the executive director of communication for them, and really just got to blend at that point a gospel redemption story with storytelling and filmmaking and creativity, which was incredible. And so recently just left that to start a new company called Kent Studio, which will just combine all that as creativity, storytelling, gospel, counseling people. So 3 kids now, extremely just thankful. It's not a 1 + 1 = 2 story. So that's the quick microwave version.
Yeah. What have you been up to, Kev?
That was very well rounded. I already have like 7 bullet points that I want to get into.
Yeah. So we'll try to figure out how to get through them, because Kevin is like fully naked today with no prep sheet.
Yeah.
We did no prep sheet. We tried. Kent and I exchanged some emails. I was like, I'm gonna get this to you on Wednesday night, and then didn't, so we're just gonna see. We'll just see. But we had exchanged some ideas about me trying to be creative about telling your story, and we thought about let's just start in the middle. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how we're gonna spider away from it. Yeah. But let's start in the middle. Yeah. There's a conversation in there somewhere that kind of forms the linchpin of your story. I think maybe maybe that's the right word, linchpin. And we'll just rotate around that, see where we go. So take us to that space and time and tell us a story.
So in that time at the Village, the Lord, as you kind of heard quickly, just had redeemed so much in my life. Whether we, on this show, you guys talk about faith, family, and work. I feel like all 3 were like, man, this is incredible, an incredible story. And at the same time, I was just sort of inside, I would say, kind of dying slowly, which is really weird. That doesn't make any sense. But that's what was happening. And so I was with a counselor named Jack Nicholson. I was joking with Stewart, not the actor, which would be a totally different counseling session, but an incredible counselor. And he had worked with Matt Chandler, our lead pastor at the Village, and then had worked with our leadership team. And then basically there were 5 of us that were going through a Train the Trainer with Jack of, man, there's so much you have to share about wholehearted leadership. So we were in a session, and Jack is really big on experiential learning, meaning that you're not just going to, like right now, we and the listeners are just taking in ideas. Experiential learning would be a physical outworking of what's going on inside. So I was telling Jack, I feel that have this slow wasting away inside. And so Jack had taught us about these quadrants of mind, strength, heart, soul. It just comes from the Great Commandments, ancient stuff, right? That when the crowds come up to Jesus saying, like, what is the greatest commandment? Because they're like, this is the teacher of Israel. Then tell me, like, what's the thing I need to know, the secret? And he's like, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbors yourself. That's it. All the commandments come to that. So if you think about mind, strength, heart, and soul, you can think about those as that's true of all of us, right? Of like these quadrants. And so mind and strength you can think of as like the human doing. Me with my mind, my intellect, learning, studying, getting concepts, ideas, theology, right? Strength being going out and executing on that and physical activities and dashboards and tactics, okay? So that's the human doing. Then beneath that is the heart and the soul, which is these are my emotions and the heart, my feelings, relationships, people, and the soul is more about storytelling, mythology, narrative, symbols, right?
Okay.
So Jack had walked us through this concept and was like, I want you to go stand, and he kind of made a quadrant on the ground with tape. So I want you to go stand in the strength quadrant, which is upper right of this quadrant. And then I want you to look down in the soul, like kind of look into that human doing. And so I did that, and he just said, what do you want? Like, what is, in all of the doing that you have, like, what is missing? And I was like, I want to get down back into the soul. Like, I miss stories. I miss creating. There's a part of the artistic side of myself that have just buried it in terms of all the things I had to do as an executive leader at a large nonprofit, as a husband, as a father. And like, there's a part of myself that was just buried. And so he said, well, if you want to get in it, then move towards it. And he said, as I started to move towards it, he got a guy that was in our group that was like CrossFit champion of the world guy. Like you look around and like this dude, he works out in his own CrossFit gym like twice a day just for fun. So he was like, JT is his name. And he was like, JT, you go stand in the soul quadrant, and Kent's going to have to push you out of that quadrant to get where he wants to go. So JT becomes the resistance that I'm feeling, this threshold that I'm up against. Mm-hmm. So I just start wrestling. We're just like wrestling, like literally like trying to push JT out of that soul quadrant so I could go into it, and kind of stopped us. And he said, don't stop like being tense. Just hold that. And he looked at me and he said, does this look like you're in a good spot right now? And I mean, I almost like just lost it. I was like, no. And he was like, okay, well, then push through into who God made you to be. Like, stop trying just to be this person that everybody sees as an executive leader and an incredible husband, and this great father. Like, those can all be true and good, but you're pretending. And so I just kind of got down and hunkered down and pushed JT out and got in there. And it was like this, something broke inside of me, like where it was like ice melting, type of experience. And I just looked across and he was like, how do you feel? And I was like, I feel alive. Like, I feel like I'm more wholehearted. And so then we just had a quick conversation, and he had me talk with Jesus, like sit across Jesus, just talk to him. Like, what do you see in all of this? And what do I want from Jesus? And so I did that. And that was like a dam breaking, where it like all of these things, I think, leading up to that point. And here's the thing, I was about to turn 40. Mm-hmm. So I'm in that space where it's like we all get to, if you're, that's part of your story, which, understanding your audience, I think there's a lot of people that age or after that. And it was like, man, I have got some work to do. And that started. Now, this is the part that you're like, good news and bad news. The good news is that started and gave me clarity for the work I need to do. The bad news is I think 4 years later, I'm just now getting on the other side of that threshold. Yeah. There was a lot of work to do. Yeah. And so Jack continued to help me with that and other things. But that was a turning point in my story that really changed the trajectory of my life and led to me sitting here today. So that's what you were kind of referencing that Stewart and I have been talking about, of that moment and what happened with Jack.
So there's something that, of course, correct me here if I kind of get part of it jumbled, but like there's something in there that was creating the resistance, right? Yes. So I think if I'm going to tell a chronology, I think what I'm saying is let's go backwards then. Yeah. Like, what is it that's generating the resistance? I mean, I could lob some stuff at you. Be like, what about this? What about this? What about this? But I'm more curious in like where you're going to go with it. Yeah. What is it that was causing that resistance that got you out of your quadrant, that sort of thing?
So I can see it as a repeating story in my life. It was similar when I talked about going prodigal, is that my tendency is to want to perform so that others say, man, Kent is unique, special, and successful. That is just a huge driver for me. So when I get at my lowest, I actually see clearest, which is just a gospel thing. And it's really weird.
Well, hold on. Say more about that. What do you mean by that?
When I get to the space where I'm really humbled, I'm broken.
Yeah, I got you.
You know, I'm like at the end of my strength. That's where Jesus always is.
Yeah. I feel that. I get you.
And so what happened is, even after this prodigal return and all of this like beautiful church community and a true just gospel motivation, over time it began to be, well, okay, Kent, you're going to be a creative writer at this agency that makes videos for big nonprofits. Great. So I'm just writing our way scripts and stories. You know what? You're really good at leadership and people. Like, let's promote you into associate creative director. Well, that feels... I was sitting up a little bit higher.
Yeah, Kent's awesome. He got promoted.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
More money, status. Oh, wait, now, our creative director left to make a movie, Paul Stellick. But, he leaves to make a movie, and it's like, okay, why don't you become creative director? Sit up a little bit higher. And then, at home, it's like, man, I love the way that you love Kristen. And I'm like, well, again, we talk about this. I learned a lot from being an idiot much younger. When I was much younger, I made, like my ex-wife had to endure a lot. And so that's a part of that. But you sit up a little bit higher. And for me, what happened is over time, slowly, bit by bit, without being able to see it, I am sitting in that strength quadrant that I'm referencing of execution, of doing things, of getting things done. Like that's what, people will say, Kent's a creative guy who gets things done. Like, heck yeah. I get things done.
Yeah, right.
But slowly, the part of me that is more of like the artistic creative side is just fading away, just getting eaten alive by this executive leader guy. And so that is what happens. And then it's like I have to get to the end of myself again in that strength story. And then the Lord is kind enough when I go back saying, God, I am lost. Like, I need help. Please help me. And he's been faithful just to be right there. To meet me. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's not everybody has a different story, right? Yeah. But it's, at least from my perspective, like I get that.
Yeah.
I get that. I mean, I was talking with someone this week, might have been yesterday actually, about how like everybody perceived me as being like a perfectionist. I have like OCD tendencies. I don't miss a comma. Don't do like everything needs to be straight. I know. But listen, this is like, I don't know that it's like necessarily like a revelation. You might be like, yeah, dog, I knew that forever. But like I've like peeled it back enough to be like, I'm actually not OCD. I'm actually not a perfectionist. What I am is a people pleaser. And the reason that I care about the minutia, the reason I care about that detail, the reason I lean in on it is that because I want you to think I'm awesome.
The layers of why.
Yeah.
But why?
Yeah. And so
keep going.
The reason I care about whether or not you use an Oxford comma.
Yeah.
Is because I want you to know that I'm educated, and I want you to know that I'm well read, and then I do blah blah blah, and blah blah blah, and eventually leading to kind of the same thing. Kent's awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's not. I don't care about a period. I care about you thinking I'm awesome.
Awesome. Yeah.
And boy, that like just peeling and tearing that away. I mean, like the 5 layers of why or whatever. Like asking you all the questions. Like there's been some of that this week where I'm just like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Oh man, it always ends in a mirror.
Yeah, I gotta go. I'll figure that out while I'm gone.
Yeah. Which is unsettling. It really is.
Yeah. Well, so what's I think you said it's kind of like a repeating pattern, right? Like a wind up, drop, wind up, drop, wind up, drop sort of a thing. So I think we continue to go backwards, but tell me some other of those stories. I took a few notes. I'll make sure we hit them, but it sounds like the one from, hey, I'm prodigal, I've wound up, drop. Like that's the most recent sort of timeline. I lost it, but decade or so.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but I think there's one before that.
Yeah. Well, even in high school, before I became a believer, I was trying to hang out with the cool kids, and trying to get affirmation that way. And my old tennis coach, Coach Caston, Miss Caston, called me out in front of the whole team and was like, hey, these people that you're hanging out with, they're making fun of you behind your back. they're not your friends, and you have a lot more in you. I was skipping school at the time and dominating Tecmo Bowl. I will say that. I mean, dominating. There was like that.
We're just using
Tecmo
Bo
Bowl.
Jackson.
Yeah, well, but then that Super Tecmo Bowl where it tracked your whole season, and so I was getting a lot of good stuff done there, but not at school. Anyway, so she just called me out. You know, it was that great coach moment where she called me out and up, maybe a little shaming, but. And she kicked me off her tennis court and, went home that summer and just was like, well, I have to find new friends because I knew she was right, but it was like, oh, this was true. So
when is that?
That was, 1995. Okay. So, I mean, that was like sophomore year of high school. Yeah. So it was moving into my junior year and, in 96 where all of that really changed. And so I say that to say that changed. I become a believer, like I talked about. And then all of a sudden, it's like I become band president, right? And then it's like I'm, making much better grades because I'm actually applying myself. And, it's all of these things start to be like, man, look at Kent, and start to be a leader in the youth group, in the church. And it's like, it's great, but then it's like I get tired because it's so much of it's being driven by external affirmation rather than internal motivation. So a question that I've asked myself lately is like, what if this company I'm starting fails and, I just have to go back and try to find a job somewhere else? Like, what do I do with that? Because you know what I mean? Like, that's why part of this is so scary. And it's like, the question is not that. It's just, I need to keep saying like, I have been created to be someone who tells stories and who is artistic and who loves that side of the world. And I can't ignore that. Like, and I can't let getting a title or a certain salary or, something. So if that's what it takes, then that is going to be the reality, is that the Lord's going to provide. And so I just need to be who I am. And that makes me better at home. I mean, Kristen's already remarked and everybody's remarked, like, since I've left the role at the church of like, it feels like I'm 10 years younger. Ooh. Now, some of that is you leave a position like that in a church, that I was in, and you have a lot of responsibility to lift it off of your shoulders for a little bit. So some of that's that, but I do think some of it's just that more of being who God uniquely made me to be. So I've went to the future there again, but
that's okay. I want to hang out there for just a second. Yeah. I've had 2 conversations in the last 2 weeks around this idea of like figuring out, and I think it's probably because Ken and I are the same age. I know you're a little younger, but we're at that like, kind of feels like a midlife crisis going on right now. Like, what the heck's like everybody's? I feel like at least a lot of people in my peer groups are wrestling with that. I've wrestled with like, is it age? Is it COVID? Like, is 2 years of staying at home or whatever you were doing? Like, does that like did that have some penchant or tendency to like snap you back to be like, what am I doing? Mm-hmm. But irrespective of the cause, the thought is processing through people's minds right now. Like, what am I supposed to be doing? Is this the right thing?
Yeah.
I'll take it to a different spot to be like, what are your spiritual gifts? Like, what has God called you to do?
Right.
And you might just be like, I've always known. But have you ever like what's the process, at least from your perspective, of trying to figure that out? Like, how did you go through that exercise? Because you very clearly identify, like, this is what I do.
Yep.
And I could have, by the way, I could have told you that like 30 years ago, bro.
That's always true, though.
Isn't that funny? Yeah. But like, what's that like specific substantive journey look like?
Yeah, so that one is the most helpful for me. Was something called the Patterson process. So Tom Patterson created it, and Tom was a process thinker. Peter Drucker called him the greatest process thinker he had ever met, which is saying a lot. Tom worked with Walt and Roy Disney to create Space Mountain. He created the PIN number that we use in the ATM machines. Reagan sent him over to China to kind of understand trades with China and the U.S. So Tom was an incredible man, but was not a believer for a lot of his career and became a believer later in life and was like, man, I would love to apply the process thinking I've done with companies, thinking of vision and strategy and tactics and all of that with people. So he created something called the Patterson Life Plan. And I was able to go through a Patterson Life Plan with their vice president, Eric Jacobson, who's an incredible guide. And it was through that process that I got clarity on, okay, these are my unique talents. This is my story, how it came together. And that was the process. But here's the fundamental, regardless of the process used, it's what you just said. Like I could have told you that 30 years ago. Yeah. It's perspective. It's like the Lord has made it to where we will not be able to get that kind of perspective on our own, because that is just, we are finite creatures. And so he has made it to where we need him. We need others. And so you've got to get perspective. So whether it's a Patterson type of guide, it's whoever you happen to know who's an incredible life coach or a counselor or a pastor, whoever it is, you need other people speaking into that and giving you that perspective. So for me, it was Patterson, doing a life plan that helped me. But there's all kinds of ways you can go get that perspective. But I think that's the key, is to go get good perspective.
Oh yeah. Mentorships and people that are ahead of you in their journey and can see things in you that you can't see in yourself.
100%. Yeah.
That's crazy.
I had that. That's super helpful. So much of the podcast is me just asking questions I want to know the answer to. It's all about Kent right now, but I kind of wanted to know what you would say for my own personal self.
Yeah.
And because I had a conversation with someone this week, and it revolved around that. He's like, I don't know, and I remember not knowing what to say to him. That's why I asked you that question. I was like, I need to go back to that person and be like, hey, what up? Try this. Because I remember saying, you've been wrestling with this for a long time, and you can't figure it out on your own. I identified the issue.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what to say in terms of so then you should. Yes. I didn't know what to say.
Yeah.
So that's super helpful, because there are people right now who are orbiting a lot of our spaces.
Yeah.
They're I don't know.
Well, it's just everybody needs a guide, and that's the heart of storytelling, right? There's no story. You've always got a hero, but there's no hero without a guide. I mean, it's the classic story, whether you're talking about Luke meeting Obi-Wan in episode 4. So I'm going to be very particular if we get into Star Wars references, but
I'm all about it.
Yeah. So you've got that, or you've got Seamus and helping Katniss in the Hunger Games. And, there's a lot that's been written about this space, whether you think about Carl Jung or Joseph Campbell, or even Donald Miller's popularized a lot of this lately, but we just need a guide. We are in some ways a hero on a journey, and you have to have a guide, and the Lord's, I believe, has made it that way. So
I've actually never had that thought before. That. Have you ever thought about that? This idea that all heroes have a guide, and as you're rattling through, some of those names mean nothing to me, but some of them hit, and I'm like, oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Hey, let me do it this way. So that Christian Leitner needed Coach K. Okay?
Yeah. Oh, now we're speaking basketball talk. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, some of that might be life's experiences, some sort of trauma or something that's I'll never go there again, or that's taught me to do it the opposite way.
That's right.
And that's your mentorship from that life experience.
That's right. And I think they change over time. We have different guides come in and out of our lives depending on where we're at in our journey.
Yeah.
But everybody needs a guide.
I'm going to ask a selfish question, because it was when he sent me your testimony video. Yeah. I don't know if I've ever heard it put this way, but it was a light bulb moment for me based on my experience. Was the honeymoon period. So I'm putting a timeline together. It looks like maybe you were saved in high school.
Yes, yeah.
You get on fire.
100%.
So that in 2012 I was saved, so not that long ago.
Yeah.
On fire.
Yep.
I had my worst self-inflicted year, 2014.
Yeah.
So for 2 years on fire, and then oh my goodness, did I enter a valley?
Yes.
And it confuses you, because I'm still a quote unquote baby Christian.
Yes.
And I'm like, but wait, why did this happen? And it's because that honeymoon period fizzled away.
Yeah, that's right.
So I kind of want to hear that from you. What did that, because you've said it twice now in the video and then on this, the honeymoon period, you were on fire, and then what?
Yeah. And then number one thing is went to college, didn't get involved in a church. So again, when I say church, people have all kinds of different, there's church hurt, there's all kinds of things that come up with church. What I mean is a group of believers who are together under some type of authority. And for some people, that's just hard, but I do think there are elements that make up a church that is following Jesus. And so I didn't get involved in that, which means I didn't have perspective, right? I didn't have community. I didn't have people around me. I certainly didn't have a guide. So I'm off by myself. And the scriptures talks about that. Satan actually asks if he can bring people over to be on their own so he can sift them like wheat. And so that is what happened to me. And I still think that's what happens when I realize when I'm far away. And part of that I talked about when you get to those broken spots, I'll be like, man, I have drifted from being known. Because we all have this deep desire to be known. Not known like even we're talking about knowledge we have of each other right now. I'm talking about known like in your worst moments. This person knows you and loves you. Yeah. You're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So that is something that when I can feel myself drifting, even with like my wife now, who is definitely that, I might be like not bringing her into everything that's going on. And then slowly I start to just kind of fade, like in my relationship with Jesus starts to suffer. And then the tendency is to run and hide instead of going near him. And I'm telling you guys, one of the best books that I have read in the past decade for sure is Gentle and Lowly. So it's by Dane Ortlund. I return to Gentle and Lowly so often, and his thesis is simply Jesus talks about his heart one time. One time he talks about his heart. And in that scripture, it says that he's gentle and lowly in spirit. And that means that in our darkest times, he will meet us. He will meet us with tenderness and grace. And like you were talking about, Kevin, in that time where you're just in 14, where it's like you're like, gosh, I just hit a low point. He's right there.
Yep.
But we want to tell ourselves that's when he's okay. This was finally the thing that broke off the relationship. And so for prodigals or people that are like have been Christians for a long time, that's what I don't feel like we hear enough about in sermons or talked about enough is that, but okay, I get it if I have become a believer, but what if I am, and then I actually have made my worst sin ever after that? Like what do I do then?
Yeah.
He meets you there. He is gentle and lowly in spirit. You repent, you look to him, and he meets you there. And he says, like he told the woman, go and sin no more. But there's also the reality of, again, we're finite. And so until we get to the new heaven and earth, we're going to have the reality of sin in our lives. So if I summed that up, I would say it was being community is like the more that I'm known, the more that there's help there. And then that sense of him being gentle and lowly to meet me when I get in those low spots, whether they're self-inflicted low spots or sometimes it is just a fallen world.
Yeah,
stuff
conditional.
Happens.
Yeah.
So
in the peaks and valleys, right? So like we're talking about the full fall.
Yeah.
So now you see this with hindsight. What checks and balances do you have in place with the continuous community and all? So if when you're at that peak and you're on fire and all that, but all of a sudden you start taking those steps down, first, second step, what are you doing? Are you telling your wife, oh, yes, I'm calling myself on the table on this, or are you telling your community group, so you don't go to the next valley? Like, what are those checks and balances?
It's that part of it is starting with this story. And so, I think it's essential that anytime you're trying to have an intentional, deep community, everybody's got to share their story and be willing to share it rawly. Then it's like now we can like actually know, hey, is this happening again, right? You can ask those questions. Yeah. So that's a big part is making sure my core group, they know my story, and they do. And then inviting them in to because it's going to be awkward. It's like no one really wants to say that. In fact, if you want to do a test of like where you're at in community, how long has it been since someone just really challenged you in your walk with Jesus? Really like, hey, this has felt like something's just off here. If it's been recently, man, count your blessings. Like you are a loved person. If it hasn't, that's okay. It's just it may be good to invite somebody into that space or be that friend to somebody else.
Yeah.
But I think that part of community, and then praying the Psalms for me has been a big one. There's a book by Donald Whitney called "Praying the Psalms." It's basically like praying God's words back to him. Because I don't know if this is how I am. I get up in the morning to pray. And before I know it, I'm like, oh, I need to do that thing on the website. That copy was not. And then it's like
in the middle of the prayer?
It's just like, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute. Oh, I got that appointment. And then all of a sudden,
and then it's 2:30.
And it's, just, But it's like, I just can't focus. And so praying the Bible was so helpful because basically the thought is you start with the Psalms, you pray God's words back to him. And although David didn't write all of the Psalms, you have a lot of different authors, you have a lot of honesty, right? So you just take these things and look. So today's the 15th. So I'm reading Psalm 15. I'm starting with whatever the day of the week is, 1 through 31. Then I go 30 Psalms up. And so I go 25, 35, 45. So now I'm reading Psalm 45. Mm-hmm. And so you just do that and I just start praying the Psalms. And that has been huge for me. And you'd put that under in classical Christian sanctification, right? That you would put that under Bible reading. But for me, it's been a little bit different than study. It's been prayer. So that's been another just helpful practice in addition to community and that gentle and lowly perspective of Jesus. So
yeah, I'm going to go back to something you said earlier because we were talking about being known, and we talk about community and having a group of folks that you're like hanging out with and all that. But I think a lot of times when people think being known, you think, oh yeah, I know his wife's X, and I know he's got kids, and he really loves X, and that's not what we're talking about. No, that's not what we're talking about. So like
Stewie's off type thing.
Yeah, like if you don't have like you alluded to it. You may have said it exactly, but like if someone's not saying, dude, the last 2 times we've met, something's wrong.
Yep.
I can tell by the intonation of your voice and your body language and the fact that you show up 7 minutes late and you got to grab your stuff and go.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, I know you.
Yeah.
And I know you're not showing up here.
Yep.
What's going on?
Yeah.
Like that's the sort of known. Like
yes.
I know what your propensities are. I know that when you hit that skid, your propensity is to go do X.
Yeah.
I see that. Are you doing X?
Yes.
How do I love you and shepherd you and bring you like?
Yep.
That's what you're talking about. That's what we're talking about. Community, not like we grab lunch once a month and we kind of go around the circle and talk about like what it's like at work and I check in with you, like that. That's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'll say for those listening, if you happen to catch this one day and you are like, that sounds great. I'm in an apartment or a home by myself after a divorce in darkness with no friends. That's what I was like in 05, 06 before I came to the village. And that's when, in that video testimony where I talk about, I was just like, Lord, just take me. And that was really my prayer was like, I am done. Like I have failed in film. I didn't accomplish what I wanted to there. I failed, as a husband. No one's going to want to marry me. And I was by myself with no friends in an apartment in Mansfield, Texas, and was just like, I'm dead. And if you're real, you've got to move. Like there's no other moves. It's like if you exist, you have to move. And I prayed that for probably 3 months with hearing nothing until a friend called me out of the blue that I went to school with in Kirbyville and had just found out that I was living in the area and invited me to come to church. And that was a turning point. So it was one call from somebody who just reached out. So I say that to say, if you're an introvert, some of that is pray. And then I would also say just you're going to have to take that step of going in somewhere. It doesn't have to be a big church. It could be a church of 30 people, but just crossing that line. And if you're an extrovert, you're going to have to take the step of being real. Everything can't just be fun and games all the time. You're going to have to actually share something that makes you feel a little vulnerable. So anyway.
I'll tell you another couple things about like taking that step, right? And I've never landed like specifically in that space, but I feel like I've been at church and like around people who you think, that person's here by themselves. That person showed up for the first,
Yeah.
And my instinct in that moment is like, I wonder if I see anybody here I know, right?
Yeah, totally.
And I try real hard. I think I try real hard to like peel off and be like, hey, you're by yourself. Not out loud, but hey, you're by yourself. Like, hey, you're lonely. See you later, buddy. No, not like that. You know,
high five, pal. See you later.
Yeah, big gulps. No, but like say, hey, I'm Stewart. Is this your first time here?
Yeah,
maybe whatever. Like, try to engage those people. But that's not always the way that you're going to be engaged if you do take that step. If you're like, man, I need to do something. Sunday's coming up. I'm going to just go.
Yeah.
It might not be awesome.
Yeah.
Like you might sit next to somebody who's an introvert. You might sit next to somebody who got in a fight with their wife on the way to church and they're just trying to wrestle with like, how am I going to have to apologize to her on the way home? And now we're not going to get Sonic and right.
Yeah.
And then, you know what I'm like, I guess what I'm saying is like, even if you take that step, you're like, I'm going to go. And it doesn't like end up in like a all glory, sunshine on you, everything is peaceful moment. Like that's not an indication that you did it wrong.
Right.
That's like, just keep going.
That's good.
Just keep like stay the course because taking the step is the right thing.
Yes.
Stay the course. Keep taking the step. Find your space. Reach out to some sort of group or like figure out where your people are there because those are safe spaces to be.
Yep. That's it.
Smaller the church, the less you can hide too. I've done some church shopping.
Yeah.
And like we walked into one by our house. It was like, I don't know, 50 people in there. It was like overwhelming. And I'm an extrovert and it was overwhelming when we left. My wife's like, I can't do this.
Yeah.
So you go into a big church, like, I could just go get fed, pop back out.
Yeah.
Kent, when we were kids in Kirbyville, Kent went to the big church, I think, right? Did you go to Central?
So that's when I became a believer. I did. When I was growing up, I went to a Methodist church, so the United Methodist Church, which even for Kirbyville, that probably actually was a big church there. So that's the church I did. And then I went to Call Junction. So
did you really?
Yeah, when you were telling your testimony on the first episode of being at Call Junction. So I actually went to a revival with you and Jonathan.
Really?
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember. I was in the 4th grade. I think that's when it was.
Yeah.
But but that's how Call Junction was. Yeah. Like if someone new was there, you'd be like, oh, somebody's new. And he's sitting in Jeff's seat. Like that sort of thing.
There's no hiding in small towns.
No.
You remember Jeff Smith?
Oh, yeah.
That's what Mom was like. I wonder if you met Jeff Smith in church before we started. I was like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Maybe, but that's like you and Jeff and Jonathan are like all like tight right there. Anywho, we went small town again.
I want to completely squirrel out on church shopping.
Go.
No, because my pastor's coming next week. So that'll be like part of the prep on his episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because like you go to one, you're like, that's not it. And then the next one, and you find, and then you walk in, and the second like your testimony, you're like,
yes,
oh my God, this is it.
This is it. Yeah.
I had, we were talking about it off air, but I had lunch with a guy who's coming on, or he's on staff. It's the second week at Watermark this week. And I was telling him the first time I went to Watermark story. I don't know if you know it or not, but they were meeting over at the Lake Highlands High School at the time.
Oh, okay.
Ash was like, we got to go. And I was like, first of all, maybe you've never been to Call Junction Baptist Church, but churches don't meet in auditoriums.
Yeah.
And also, these people have on khaki shorts and flip flops. They clearly don't know anything about God. Super judgmental. I was like, oh, we're here, and there's a band. Like we've got to go.
Yeah, strike 3.
Yeah, let's go. Get your purse and let's go.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, but eventually, I kind of came around to it. But anywho,
just a little bit.
All right, I'm going to go back to signpost this and then continue to pull your story backwards. That video.
Yeah.
Man, when I watched it, and obviously there was a probably a decade or more, like we didn't hang out and talk much. But when I watched that, I was like, oh my God, I've never heard that story before.
Yeah.
And I can speculate like what things like drew you, like what the reverse of that ramp is, right? They got you there. I can speculate as to what some of them were.
Yeah.
But again, I'll just roll the ball across the table and see, because I'm curious. There's something in that story that got you to that spot, and a lesson to be learned from that story, if not the slope downward as well. So, tell me another story.
Well, I mean, the LA part was a season where, again, we co-wrote a script about Galveston, which is an incredible story of the storm that struck Galveston in 1900, that it killed 6,000 to 8,000 people just in one night. And Galveston, a lot of people don't know, was going to be the dominant port city for Texas. In fact, at the time, there were more millionaires per capita than any city. But what in Rhode Island, I can't remember the exact city in Rhode Island, but it was like a profitable, incredible place, and has all the first in Texas: first streetcar, first electric light, all that stuff. And so we wrote this story about this storm that just comes almost like a monster to destroy the city, and at the same time set it with a boy whose dad dies at the beginning of the movie, and then learns going through his dad's stuff that he was adopted. And so the only thing he has is a compass that has Galveston on it, and he sets off at the beginning to go to Galveston to try to find his father. And so you get to experience getting there from his perspective and seeing all of the opulence and craziness of it. So then it just becomes from there his search for his father. It's a love story all the while this hurricane's coming to destroy it. And so it was a really well received. We got into all these rooms, a lot of my heroes. You're like, oh, wow, we're like really close to something going through. And it just never would. And part of it was it's a $150 million film, and that was in 2003 to make. So you're talking about creating this town at the turn of the 20th century and then destroying it with the greatest natural disaster in American history. It's expensive.
Yeah.
And so through those ups and downs, I was having success and then failure, success and then failure. Come back, and my ex-wife was working on her master's in architecture, so we moved so she could do that. And
I'm jumping here. Y'all were married at the time.
Married at the time.
Not yet divorced.
Not yet divorced. Okay. So we got married, just so people have a timeline. We got married when I was 19. We're married for 6.5 years, and then so we got divorced officially in 2004.
Okay.
So that was all going on. But basically, if you look at what a man is supposed to do for a woman, provide for her, be faithful in every way, be a servant to her. It was just strike, strike, strike. Like I was not doing any of those things. And so she got to the point where she just didn't want to be married anymore. And so she made that call and left. And that was obviously just devastating. Divorce is, we had kind of talked about this before. I did want to say divorce, the best way I can explain it is it's like someone's died and yet they haven't, but they're just gone. And someone that you're that close to. And so it was awful.
I'm going to give color to that it exists, but I just want to like say it right here is like this individual is not just like someone that you met and got married to, or
right.
Like ever since I've known Kent, y'all were dating.
Yes.
Like this, like since not since I've known you.
Yeah.
But like the 7th or 8th grade.
Yeah.
Is this right?
I stole her yearbook and wrote in there like, "I love you. I'll marry you someday," in 6th grade.
Okay.
That
so
happened. Yeah.
And so this is like a long.
Yeah, it was a long
story that gets to this point. It's not just like, oh, I got married, it didn't work out.
For all the listeners, my wife knows every bit of all this, and she's like, "Share your story, right?"
Yeah.
Because she's incredible.
Yeah.
She loves the gospel. But anyway, so yes, that's right. Yeah, it was a long. We'd known each other a long time, and so. Yeah, all that happened, and so I would look back and how I got to that apartment that day is that was kind of it. Again, slow and steady of making this Oscar statue be a goal. Which, by the way, I used to make fun of my Sunday school teachers all the time of like, how did the Egyptians get saved from the largest army in the world and watch a sea get parted, and then put back together so they can be saved, and then they like 6 months later are making golden calf to a different god? But that's exactly what happened in my story, and it's where it's like I'm saved, I see the sea parted, I see my enemy defeated, I am like free, right? I am a slave who is now free, and then like months later, years later, I am literally bowing down to a statue, a golden statue that just happens to be called an Oscar. That happened, and I'm like, the Lord has a sense of humor, because I'm like, I shouldn't have made fun of my teachers, little Sunday school teachers back in the day, because that's exactly what happened to me. So all that led, that chase of the Oscar, selfishness, all these things, not being in any community at all, led to that point of being in that apartment in Mansfield and just crying out for help.
There's a lot to the how did that happen, and yet it's happening right at your feet.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I feel like I do. I'm super guilty of looking back at like Old Testament stories or what the case may be like. You wandered in the wilderness for forever, and food like literally was there for you to eat, and then not 5 minutes. Like, how in the world? And so then, stupid. Lo and behold, there's food on my table to eat, and I'm like, I was like,
I know,
you're such an idiot.
Yeah,
you're such a dum.
Yeah, he's patient.
Patient is a great That's probably one of my. If you had to like characterize God. Yeah. Patience is probably like one of the things that speaks most to me because I'm so impatient.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm just like, forget about it. I'll just do it myself.
Yeah.
And you think like, well, that's not how God is.
No.
Like he's like, no, stop. Okay, come here.
Yes.
Okay, you're still an idiot.
I
still love you. Come here. Come like, and I think about like my parenting style on top of like being a godly father. Like how many failures are on that, right? Like, all right, so let's see. Do we keep rewinding? I don't know where we go from here. You have to help me. You're the creative storyteller, man. You're the storyteller.
We really did do Memento here. It's like,
did we really?
I love it. We're all over the place. It's great.
Yeah, you're going to have to put these pieces back together.
See what a prep sheet does?
Yeah, no.
It makes it boring, right, Kent?
Yeah, that's
right. Uno reverse that one.
Yeah. Temperament types.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know. The things that we did talk about, so we've been back and forth that you mentioned, and we'll see if we want to, is, talking about being in the church world and what goes all in that. That was something we talked about. And then, really, I think it's somewhat of just where things are now. But I think we've hit everything else that we were talking about.
I'm going to tell a fun story, and I'll see if there's something in it, and then I'm going to jump forward. But Kent and I were homies, and then I moved in the 8th grade.
Let's see. No, it was 7th, because that's when I had to move to, because we were playing together in 7th grade when I told that story at the beginning.
Yeah.
I kind of came out of my shell, and then Mom was like, "Hey, we're moving to Jasper," and then you moved at the same time, or right around there to Hardin Jefferson.
Yeah.
So anyway,
and so we were homies from afar. This was like pre-internet, so I don't even know how we stayed in touch. Like I have no idea.
Probably just you coming home to visit Grandma.
Probably, going to see Granny. But then lo and behold, I ended up living in a neighborhood in Beaumont.
Yeah.
that your dad lives in the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
And so like fast forward, and then we would spend like randomly weeks during the summer as teenagers. Like, oh, Kent's at his dad's house. I guess I'll go play Sega Genesis all day.
Yes.
You remember that?
Oh, yeah. NCAA basketball. We play a lot, too, on the Nintendo.
Yes.
Yeah, with Stewart being Duke, of course.
Yeah.
I don't even think they had Baylor. That was before they won the national championship.
That was before Baylor was any good.
Yeah.
Yeah. This was before Baylor did a bunch of stuff.
True.
We need to go.
Okay. Hey, let's not go there.
Yeah, we need to go there. We need to go there. I'm gonna see if I can pull something out from there, if there is something. But like, there's a part of that story where like your father died.
Yeah.
I don't know that he was young, right? How old was your dad when he passed?
57.
Okay,
that's young.
And then
especially the older it gets.
You said, right. And then you said something earlier about how like you grew up, and I didn't know that about you. That like you don't remember your parents being married.
Right.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So if there's a thread there to pull or something, like I'd be curious what that story kind of sounds like, just to see what's in there. So tell me something.
Yeah, I mean, divorce is a thread for sure because my mom and dad got divorced when I was about 2, so that's why I just don't have any memories there. And then obviously, as I told my story of divorce, but I think when I look back on it, the thing that's been most prescient lately has I just accepted it for what it was growing up and didn't realize the effects it had on me until much, much later, where as mom or dad before he passed would talk about the fights they had, I was like, oh man, when my oldest son, Drew, turned 2, it was the first time I went, man, if he saw that type of fight and he saw that type of hate between his parents, that's going to have an effect on a 2-year-old. Mm-hmm. Like it just gets in there. And so part of my work as I kept working with Jack one-on-one was to explore that part, which is really hard, but really beneficial. Just, man, where did that part of my childhood just really get disrupted? And so that part of divorce, I didn't even realize the ripple effects of it until a few years ago. And so there's that. And then with dad passing, I think the thing there was we had a really rough relationship, as you would think, probably hearing enough of this story, like that's going to be a strained relationship, but that grew a lot closer as I got older. And, especially as after I went through my divorce, now I'm sitting with somebody who can empathize because he had been through it. And this is just the oddity of the way sin works out, but then also the gospel of the Lord will bring these mercies out of this awfulness. And so we connected a lot in that time and had a good run where we just got to be friends and got to talk about life before he passed. Mm-hmm. And so Lord was really good there. But there is something about your dad dying that just is a game changer too in life. Like I'll never forget going into MD Anderson in Houston and walking into the hospital room. My stepmom said, he fell. We're at MD Anderson. And I walked in and his mouth was just like a gate. Like he was just out of it. And I was like, this is really bad. Mm. And it was, it was one of those things where the doctor said, he's got so many brain tumors, we can't even count them, on the scan. Right. Where you're just, so we're just like praying, just until something is different, I'm going to just ask for a miracle. Right. And that's what we did. But it was 4 weeks later. I'd been to visit him and had been there, went back home for a little bit to do some work. And my son, my oldest Drew, had just been born, so he was 3 months old. And I was holding him, and my stepmom called and said, your dad died. And I just remember weeping, it just broke. And then my 3-year-old was grabbing at my tears and laughing. And that is like, if there's something that sums up life, that story will always stick with me because that's it, right? Like new life, this opportunity to be a dad with this 3-year-old boy or 3-month-old boy, and then this death of my dad all at the same time. And so that was everything you would think in terms of changing again, being a turning point in my story. So that's how I would thread that.
I'm going to go back to the divorce at an early age because you said something about ripple effects that I want to come back and touch on.
Yeah.
But right now, I just want to linger in the space of like a lot of my reading on, I'm using my air quotes, but like midlife crisis, is the confluence of all these things hitting your life at once.
Right.
You're at the peak of your career. Your kids are like reaching a point where everything is like at a high inflection. You're you've been married for X number of years, your parents are aging, and that's typically like the 4 you read about, kind of like hitting a confluence point. You're just like, it is so much right now.
Yeah.
And so mom and dad are fine, right? Yeah. But they're born in 51, right? Yeah. So they're 71, about to be 72. They're old. They're older. They're not old. My parents get around, but like you start having these thoughts of like, my Mimi just passed away. Like that phone call will come and all that, So the thing I wrestle with, and the reason, and this is kind of back to your question, back to your story, is like, what do you do when you, in those moments, like to not have regret on the backside of that phone call?
Yeah.
And through your experience with your dad passing, like, is there anything in there that you're like, here's an idea, or here's something I did, or something I wished I did, or something?
Yeah.
Because that phone call will come for everybody.
Yeah. That's right. So the number one thing it's done is it's Ecclesiastes, right? Which is my favorite book in the Bible, which again, I said I was prone to melancholy. But, Ecclesiastes is basically says it is better to go to the house of mourning than the house of feasting. And so when you do spend the appropriate amount of time thinking about that day, when that call comes to bring you into the house of mourning, what Ecclesiastes is saying is it gives you right perspective. And we know that, right? Even if it hasn't been mom or dad, when you've been, or even like with Granny being at the funeral, all of a sudden things get real.
Yeah.
You see clearer. Everything is just like, man, it's sobering. And so,
did I tell you that story? Like,
I knew that you were going. I haven't heard about what happened while you were there.
I interrupted because I thought that, like, the way you said it was so clear. I was like, I must have told him my story.
Yeah.
Keep going, and I'll come back to it.
So that the main takeaway for me, and what I try to do now, is to think, okay, even if and not in a morbid way, but I think, what if I only have until I'm 57? I mean, I could have this afternoon. I want to be clear about it. I mean, it's just a thing that I use to go, okay, if I've got till 57, how do I live my life with intentionality? And this is another way that the life plan was super helpful for me, because I was trying to ask that question of like, what is the most meaningful use of my heart and my talents and my story? And so that's how that moved. But in terms of looking back, if you're thinking about if this happens to me, or it won't be if, it's when this happens to me, I would just say it's an Ecclesiastes sort of exhortation of how am I living my life with my kids, with my wife, with my friends? Where am I spending my time? And is it the right use of that time?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as you were saying that, like, just crystal clear to me as I could have, like, you said it, I was like, I told him this. Sitting in the nursing home with my Mimi before she passed, right? And like just sitting there, and she was like in the wheelchair, and I was just looking around and like had this moment of, it all boils down to this.
We talked about that before.
Okay.
Yes, where it was like you had that clarity when you realized this is the end.
This is, yes. And I was just like, man, if it's like a hustle, I mean, my Mimi was, I forget, 95, 97, something like this. Yeah. Like all these things through her life, and all the things, and she raised 2 kids and blah, 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 and did all these things. And here we are.
Yeah.
And who's here?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that like in a condescending way. Like there were people there, like, that cared for her and loved her. Like it wasn't like a sad funeral or anything. It was just like those people are there, and sometimes we're out chasing people and things and money and whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Right? Like at the end of this story, there's a fistful of folks there.
Yeah.
And that like just gave me like some stupid clarity.
Well, and again, Ecclesiastes, it's vanity of vanities, or hevel, and so it's the Hebrew, and so it's just like, that's what it's saying. That it's a book about that, unless you get beyond the sun, which in that metaphor is getting to Father, Son, Spirit, and getting to the heart of things. So.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna hit us with one more like reverse move, and then we'll go forward. You're talking about like the ripple effects, like the things that unremembered but perceived ideas that have like influenced you because it was so young, and oftentimes I think around this like, well, let's unpack all that. Right. I'm like, oh, come on, man, like I've dealt with that.
Right.
Like I need to unpack that happened. It's over. I dealt with it. We're moving on. I still kind of live in that space, and so that's why like when you're telling the story of like we unpacked it and I talked about it and I identified how it affected my trip, I want to talk about that just a little bit because, like, even as we sit right now, I'm like, I can't understand the value of it. But there's clearly some value. You've just articulated. So talk more about that.
Well, it's just being in a rut that you don't know. And so you want to, if you're actually in a rut, although you think you're moving, you'd rather somebody tap you on the shoulder and go, hey, but you're not actually moving. So that's what it is. Now, you don't want to dwell on it. I do think there's a danger when you begin to do that work of dwelling in it, and now all of a sudden your story is just all about your past. That's not good either.
Yeah.
But you do want to have some clarity of like, man, I fall into these patterns. And as we talk about like getting behind the why and the next why and all of that, you're answering that question of why. Like when I look back at my story, are there clues to why I find myself in these patterns? And those are going to be different depending on our story. Mm-hmm. But that's the value so that you can see, and now you can start to live a new story. You can actually really say, man, I don't want to live that rut anymore. I want to go over there. There's like a beautiful lake and trees, and I want to go see that. Well, it's going to take getting out of the rut, which, by the way, what do you need when you're trying to get out of a rut if the car's stuck?
Yeah, a hand.
A hand.
Yeah.
And so that goes back to what we talked about with perspective. I need help. Getting that help so you can get onto a different path and one that is going to lead more to flourishing. And so that's what I would say about the past work. And,
okay. That makes sense.
Don't overdo it, but you do need to do it some. And then once you have clarity, again, you just don't need to keep repeating it all over again. It's just like, unless you're in this story space where like, here's what I've learned.
Yeah.
But don't need to continue to come back to it.
That makes sense. I appreciate that. Okay, let's, in true memento fashion, I suppose, let's zoom forward. You spent a lot of time at the church, man.
Yeah.
Leading, navigating, communicating, storytelling. And I'm not asking for church secrets here. Like, I'm not like, oh, tell me all the dirty secrets. Like, even to the extent, I don't want to know them. But, like, surely there's something, like, for a listener in there who's like, oh, okay, in this situation, this is a way to handle it. Or here's I don't know where we're going here, but I'm just going to kind of, again, roll the ball across the table and say, what of that you think, oh, man, I really learned that while I was there?
I think it's just having empathy for other viewpoints. When you're, especially at a large church, you're going to get all the viewpoints. And when you're in leadership at a large church, they'll make sure they get it to you. No problems there. And so, I think about, obviously, COVID, we felt that to an extreme. We felt that in families even, just we would sit with some people and they would be chastising us for not leading with courage and, being that, man, we're virtual for too long. Then you would sit with other people when we went back in person, right? Who are like, golly, this is just, you're killing people by being back in person. And it was like, if you look at the timeline, our particular route was we were back earlier than a lot, even in Texas. But we still had some of the people going, man, you guys just didn't lead with courage there. And so it's like, it's really hard. At the same time, you're like, how do you just listen? How do you get the perspective? You don't have to take everything, but it's good just to be able to sit there and listen. And there have been times, where it's like we really messed something up that you're just like, man, we really messed up there. And you helped us see that. And so we're sorry. We got to learn from it. Here's what it looks like to learn from it. So that for me was huge, especially as an introvert by nature, being in that space of serving thousands of people in person with all those different viewpoints. It was helpful, although hard, to like be able to empathize and hear all these different perspectives. And then you can use COVID, but you can apply that to racial relations as we went through all of that. You can apply it to other things that we had, which you can look up online if you want to, that were just super hard and very public. All those different situations, you're going through this empathizing with this listening. I tried to tell myself after a while, like, we have two ears and one mouth for a reason.
Yeah.
So those were, it's high level things. And then there's just a lot you do see a lot of pastors leaving. I think there's all kinds of reasons for that. But it's certainly been a turbulent time, and pastors really took a lot on the chin with people just sort of unvarnished, being like angry, sad, all in between. And so kudos to those who've just been faithfully caring for people, and counselors and first responders and all those, because it's been a taxing few years.
I can remember a very specific Sunday where at Watermark where they threw, it was like, I forget the graphic, but it was like COVID in the middle, right? It was some sort of weird PowerPoint. Right. And then just like all these like little message clips, like here, we're doing the best we can. Let me give you some perspective on the communication that we're getting. And it's this exact thing. And it's like every, like, you're back too early. You're not back soon enough. Yep. Who wears a mask? Everybody wears a mask. Where's the hand sanitizer? Hand sanitizers for the week. You know, like just like, oh my, like how do you navigate that?
Yeah.
Just go ahead.
Please see the following scriptures for grace.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I feel like we tried to lead with grace in all of it. It's like we're literally unprecedented time. Yeah. We're listening as best as we can to all the things and making the best decisions we can. And we're going to screw it up. And I'm sorry in advance. That kind of felt, at least how we were approaching it.
I think CEOs of companies and all kinds of, everybody was dealing with this, right? It was all like, why are we having to be in the office or not be in the office? Or why could we be on sites and not be on? Everybody was dealing with it. And so it really, really trying, but also like anything like that, you learn a lot.
So you got some?
Well, I was going to say, I've never worked at a church, but I've served like in that honeymoon period.
Yeah.
All the ministries. And you figure that out. There's so many business parallels. Like two things. There's business parallels, and not everybody in the quote unquote company is great.
That's right.
And then the realization from a Christian standpoint that every single one of us is flawed.
100%.
You know, there's only one that isn't, right?
That's right.
Like so things are going to go wrong, mistakes are going to be made, and you got to have some grace and perspective in that. No matter what side you're on, opinion, it doesn't matter.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I struggle with, and it was actually what I was talking about to Tim Rothberg on the phone whenever I walked in today, and you scared the absolute crazy out of me. I was actually talking with him about how you take whatever those ideas are, whatever the issues are, this work, church, the smorgasbord of information, and then what do you do with it?
Right.
Because my knee jerk is to just give like a Stewart perspective on solving that problem.
Right.
Like, oh, you're unhappy about this. Here's how you should be happy about it. Boom, gone, solved, busted, did it. And I think the inflection point where you scared me was, I hate you, where you scared me was I was actually saying like, how do you flip the switch in your brain so that when you take all those data points, your first thought is to like turn to the Bible and be like, what does the Bible say about this? Mm-hmm. And then you scared me and I screamed and
lost all train of
thought and hung up on Tim. But I mean, you living in that sort of, we're going to turn to the Bible to solve this problem space.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on like activating or flipping that switch? I was having that thought today and I don't know how to do it.
Yeah. I will say, there were many times where that wasn't my instinct, and where I would have just godly men and women around me that it was theirs. And here's the thing, though. I think they'd probably say the same if they were sitting here. So we're back to community. We're back to like, okay, there's other perspectives and viewpoints here, and we're just not always going to see clearly when we're in leadership. And so how do we listen to those? And again, you can't listen to everybody. You shouldn't listen to everybody. But who are those, the wisdom of counselors that Scripture talks about when we're in gray areas? We're not dealing with outright sin. We're dealing with a wisdom issue. Mm. Who is the wisdom? Where can I go get the wisdom of counselors? And so I would say, sometimes I might be that voice that was like, well, there's ancient paths that have just all been laid out for us here that we can go and look to. And then other times, I'm having to be reminded of that. Like I'm jumping into, here's exactly what I would do using all the corporate best practices I know. And it would be like, well, the Bible speaks. And I was probably more, I was prone to that because I'd been in the corporate space. I didn't want to necessarily be a pastor, and obviously I'm not now again. But that there was a group of people that was, praise the Lord, they've always wanted to be pastors. Yeah. And they've studied the Scriptures like thoroughly, love it, and praise the Lord for each of you. So those who will be super helpful when I might step into, well, this is how we would do it in corporate world. And now, again, sometimes they needed to hear that, right? So then that's what Kevin was talking about earlier, that you start to see some of the things that are similar about both spaces. But
the pastor gig is so difficult.
It is.
Because, any public speaking really, but that especially, like you say one bad word in a sentence, and instead of the hour-long sermon that was hitting home, it's like, did he say stupid?
Yeah.
You're like, yes, he did. He's going off his dome right now. Right. And people make mistakes.
People make mistakes.
Yeah. I talked to my pastor, which he's coming on next week, and Like, I just try to affirm him, like, man, you crushed that. Like, great job. He's like, man, you came to the 8:30 service. It was the worst of the bunch. I'm like, I promise you it was great, man. Yeah. You did a great job.
Yeah.
That's a tough gig.
Yeah.
There's a, I'm trying to scroll and find it, but Wes Butler, a buddy of mine in my small group, turned me on to the other day. I think is it Carrie Newhouse?
Yeah, he's our new off. You're thinking about Carrie Newhoff, who has a leadership podcast.
Yes,
yeah.
And he had someone on just in the last couple of weeks. I've been listening to it, and then I'm terrible with names right now, and I can't find it while I'm scrolling. But it was talking about like how hard it is to be a on the stage pastor right now, because it's all performance.
Yeah,
it's all, is your graphic cool, and am I entertained?
Right.
And we got away from pastoring like, well, I know Aunt May is in the hospital and I should go check on her because she's part of our body, and is someone bringing dinner to their family and all that stuff. We've gotten away from it because I can't do that. I'm too busy working on my slide deck. I got to get and then I got to make sure my jokes are just in the right spot and all that. Like that's how like the pastoring is sort of pivoted.
Yeah.
And if I kind of will half steal a line out of Gladiator, but if we are not entertained, then we're like, there's probably another church down the road. Let's go check that one out, you know?
Well, and think about it, though. Even sitting here, what you guys have created with 1720 is this wouldn't have happened 30 years ago.
No.
All this tech would be way too expensive. You've got NBC, ABC, CBS, some cable channels that can do this. And now we've got this accessible technology to make incredible media and tell stories, which is awesome. But it raises up that bar for everybody now, where it's like everybody's in media.
Yeah.
And so everybody's got a voice. And so that part is really challenging, especially again if you're saying you're that lead teaching pastor and have that platform. So
yeah. Okay, so I found out why we're talking. It's it is Carrie Newhoff.
Yeah.
And he interviewed Andy Crouch on the problem of breakdowns of trust, the problem with personalization, and the disruptions. Go check it out.
Well, read anything you can from Andy Crouch.
Yes.
Yeah, Andy is one of my favorite people.
Andy did the book on like technology in your home.
TechWise Family. And just came out with a new book about a meaningful life, and tech is always going to be a part of his discussions.
Yeah. So it was very interesting. Finish listening here,
and then
go check that out. Check that out. Okay, so I think we've told. I'm looking at my notes. Just kidding. I don't have any. I think
Kevin knows.
I feel like we wove it all through here.
Yeah.
Did we get it?
I think
what
so.
did we miss? If we forgot something. What did we forget, man?
I mean, I think the only thing it's been more the future side of where things are going. I was telling you guys that in leaving the Village Show, May 15th was my last Sunday, which is again a multi-year journey starting with Jack. Something's off here, and got to clarity that this is the next step for me. Which it's felt like building two companies at once, where it's like trying to take this work, and in these ways that we've been healed, right? We always want to then go and help others in the same way. And so part of what I'm doing is that transformational leadership work is kind of the title for the work with Jack that he trained me in, because I love doing that with people now and the ways that it's helped me. And so doing that, and then finishing my Patterson certification so I can do life plans for people.
Gotcha.
So I'm doing that while also on the creative side, because I learned I can't just do that kind of – if I just wanted to do that kind of work by itself, I could stay at the Village, because that's really what I was getting to do. There was a part I learned in my life plan where I'm like, I want to create. I want to tell stories. I've got to get back to that part of myself.
That's your soul part.
That's the soul part. And so that's where I'm working in and around augmented reality. So it's a big word, but all it really means is just where we're taking kind of digital assets and putting them on our real world life. This will be where everything goes. By 2030, your phone will be obsolete, and it'll be glasses that we look through to tell us things like the weather and to navigate and all of that. And so what I'm trying to do is the storytelling side, because what that can do is reveal wonder in the world. And to be, in the case of one of the stories I'm working on, it's set in Fair Park in Dallas, but it's about a little boy named Max who's lost his father to cancer at the beginning of the story. And he goes into this dream world sometimes to cope and to just make it. And so I want to, in A Secret Life of Walter Mitty style, if you've seen that, or Finding Neverland, be able to show the audience what Max is dreaming about. So augmented reality, when you do like a musical, let's say at Fair Park Music Hall, you can show that. You can have people put glasses on, kind of like you're at a 3D experience, and see what Max is seeing in his head. So if big text comes alive, we can see big text step out and come alive for us on stage through AR. While he's interacting with Max as a human actor. So that, I love that space of where you kind of reveal wonder that's sometimes hidden in the world through storytelling. So working in those two spaces, trying to make all the story we've talked about converge. Right.
Yeah.
So that's where things are today and moving into the future, hopefully.
That's exciting, man.
Dude, put your mind around that idea for just a minute. Oh, you can't.
Yeah.
Like Ken and I had lunch 2 weeks ago, a month ago, I can't remember. And I was just like, I remember like wide-eyed listening and be like, that sounds amazing.
Yeah.
I have no idea what we're talking about. The future sounds awesome. Can we go there?
Yeah, I want to go to there. But the at the end of the day, it's story, right? It's whatever happens with the ways that VR, virtual reality, where you're putting in goggles and go into a whole nother world, right? Mm-hmm. Whether you're talking about VR or AR or extended reality, which is XR, it's still going to come down to storytelling. So it'll be a good story well told will make all the difference, because it's just like when film came around, it was a way to tell stories. But just because somebody can pick up a camera, as we know, doesn't mean it's going to be a great story. Mm-hmm. So all of that will come down to the story. So
we're seeing that in construction, our space where somebody's got a HoloLens. I'm sure you know what that means.
Absolutely.
And you're standing in the building with a 3D model, and they place little things throughout it. And now an owner and an architect, instead of like visualizing on paper or even a 3D model, they can walk their space like this studio and be like, the finished sample of that panel and that paint, it looks good on paper, it looks good in a rendering, but when I'm physically standing in it, it looks like trash. We need 100%. To completely change all of it.
That's right.
Crazy game-changing innovation, man.
Yeah, education and construction and healthcare, all of those have been more at the forefront of using VR and AR for training, for visualization. So, and that's where a lot of the money will be. I just want to do it more on the storytelling side. Like imagine that space, how it could use it. But we'll see if it takes those other industries to fund usually the stories.
Yeah.
So, because those are very practical needs, that you just gave a great example, or like a surgeon doing training where you can, put the HoloLens on and you're seeing these are the different parts of the anatomy just laid over. That's so different than reading about it in a book or watching a video about it, right? It's immersive.
Yeah.
So that's why all that, that's where it's going.
Yeah. That's amazing and crazy.
It is.
And it's consistent with this idea that like deep inside your soul, you're a storyteller.
That's it.
How many stories you got banging around your head at any given time?
Oh gosh. I mean, honestly, I do try to keep, we were talking about before we started recording the idea book.
Yeah.
And so I have that, but when right now it's mostly Fair Park.
Yeah.
Cause I'm trying to get to know the characters. I'm trying to understand who Max is and who Lucy is and who Henry is and all these people, because I got to know their psyches. I got to know their family, their all that. And so it takes a lot to like go that deep. But if you don't do that, you're going to end up with a plot-driven story that has no heart, no character to it. So I can only do so much of that kind of deep work. But I will have other ideas, and I might scratch it down and put it in an idea book.
Like, do you intentionally go think about that, or is it just always rumbling in your head?
It's rumbling ahead, but I do have to set time aside. Or here's the key: if I don't set intentional time aside and don't bring discipline in, then it'll rumble around in my head and nothing will ever get done. And that's the bane of a lot of creatives, is you have a lot of these ideas, but you're never able to synthesize. And so people that are wired more like me have to do the work of like, when is my writing time?
Yeah.
How many words a day am I doing? What's the discipline there that I just chop wood, carry water, if you know that book, where it's just like, that's what I'm going to do. And so that's how I would explain that. Yeah.
What is your vehicle or accelerator? For me, gym vision. So like heavy workout or a long run, like all of a sudden, poof, 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 poof.
Yes.
Oh, this is what we need to do. I go immediately home and peck it out on a keyboard or write it down in a
That's
journal.
right. Yeah.
So what is it for you?
Usually it's riding the bike is one. So like riding, and I don't mean outside. Like for all my friends that make fun of me, I'm on Peloton. But they're like, why don't you ride a real bike sometimes? I'm like,
it's legit.
And I'm like, because I just don't have this trainer with me who's telling me exactly what to do and pushing me. Anyway, but generally when I get off of that, similar, I mean, it's how our bodies are wired, right? That adrenaline flows, endorphins are being released, and you have ideas, like things are popping. So that's a good one. Music is huge for me. So just I just started re-listening to My Chemical Romance, a song called Welcome to the Black Parade, and it is phenomenal. That whole album, it came out in like 2006 or something, but they basically set aside, it's like emo punk, but they set aside to try to write a concept album that was a musical about a person, essentially a man who's dying, and this is like what he's seeing the whole album as he's dying. And the song, Welcome to the Black Parade, is fantastical. And I'm like, I want to try to put it into the Fair Park musical. So like I'll listen to a song like that and think, what if that was part of the story that we told, even in the musical? I'm saying, if not, it's going to inspire it. And so it'll lead to that kind of inspiration. So all that to say, like music is huge for me too, in addition to working out.
Yeah.
You big My Chemical Romance fan, Kev?
No.
Do you know any My Chemical Romance songs?
I know of them.
I know the name,
yeah,
but that's about the best I could do.
I
feel like our musical interests probably diverge more than some of the other things.
Here's something fascinating you can do is if you go, the New York Times in 2019 wrote a big like interactive retrospective about that album that they made, and it pulls all their influences. So it's like the album. Cool. And then so that you'll hear about the Beatles and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Band and how that influenced them, or it might be like Paul Simon. Then all the future, like the bands they influenced, all the way to like trap music, like how like lo-fi hip hop have been influenced by My Chemical Romance. All this that we've taken a big detour, just space I love. But that, if you want to like just take a musical history tour and understand like why music is the way it is right now, like that album was huge. It was very influential. The New York Times is a really cool, if you just Google that, it's like 2019. It's a really cool interactive retrospective about the whole thing.
I don't know that I love My Chemical Romance, but I love learning and stories, and I will go.
What
I will go now.
It's just interesting.
I will go now and watch it.
We all have our own, and I actually remember that I have such a weird memory. I can't remember like what I ate for breakfast, but I'm going to pull this one out. I remember sending like Tool Fear Inoculum album, and I sent it to you. I remember the machine I was on at the gym. I'm like, this album is a musical masterpiece. And like in classic Stewie or Kevin format, you're like, absolutely not, but cool, good on you, man.
Yeah, absolutely not. And then I returned
with that.
Yeah. And then I returned with like some hip hop something, right?
Yeah, but like every song is like it's like a movie. It's like 13, 15 minutes long, and it takes you through this. And like, it's what made me survive my marathon. Like after I couldn't handle books anymore, it's Fear Inoculum. Let's go.
Do you know that album?
I don't. See, I
it's
just
unbelievable.
I will check it out. So,
do you know Tool? Are you a Tool fan?
I know Tool. I just don't know the album. I haven't ever taken.
It's their newest one. It's insane.
Okay.
But you have to be a fan of like rock.
And it's hard in the like Spotify, Apple Music world where it's just about singles and short singles, right? That could be made into TikTok videos of 30 seconds. This kind of stuff is just really rare now. So.
Yeah, that's old. It's 80s, 70s rock type thing. They have a long song like that, like Rush.
Yes. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
I was thinking the other day that like we've lost the CD in the CD player. Just listen to it from start to finish.
But we're saying album, like a bunch of old heads.
Well, that is a dead game. It's like,
is album like an old word?
Yeah. What album are you holding?
Nobody really.
It's a Spotify playlist.
Yeah. It's just a soundtrack.
We're old.
I literally thought about though, and maybe we'll do this with Tool too, of getting that My Chemical Romance, the Welcome to the Black Parade CD, just so I'd force myself on like the next road trip or something to just listen to it from beginning to end, because it's just so true. We just don't do that anymore.
You could put it in your disc, man, and try to.
My truck actually has a CD player. I don't know why, but
Boom.
It does.
There you
Thanks,
go.
Ram.
All right, I wouldn't have thought we were going to end with.
I loved it.
A Tool album, but whatever.
Well, My Chemical Romance. This is
his
story, not mine.
Yeah, it's your story.
I did that.
Yeah, you did that. All right, so we usually wrap with like a couple of normal things we do, right?
Yeah.
A book and sort of a one big punchy thing at the end.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to curveball you here, though.
Right.
Given your creative instincts.
Yeah.
And I'm going to make you tell me favorite album.
Mm-hmm.
You can go with that one if you want. Favorite movie.
Mm-hmm.
book and one big thing. We're gonna 4-step out.
Well, he already did half of it.
Yeah.
Star Wars, Gentle and Lowly.
I have done. Those are good choices.
He's got something else in there.
I've got something for you.
Memento.
So,
you better say Memento.
No, I do like Nolan sometimes. Sometimes he frustrates me. So Good Will Hunting is my favorite movie. And listen to this, I'm sure you can see why. But just incredible performances. I have no idea how Matt Damon and Ben Affleck wrote that in their early 20s.
Yeah.
Just a profound story and funny.
Yeah.
And it just has it all. I would say Gentle and Lowly is the book. I love to read, but that's one that has really stuck with me and just helped me, in just times of really, really hard times. I love that My Chemical Romance album, also X and Y, like we were talking about walking in Coldplay. I have my Coldplay shirt on, love Coldplay. So, there's some people that are just, just like haters, and then
they're glad that was at the end. They're like, man, if that was at the front of this episode, we'd
I just been like, next,
shut her down.
Yeah, first and foremost, huge Coldplay guy.
Yeah. Next.
Yeah, I'll try to catch the next guy on. Yeah, not this dude.
We should start that with Pastor Sam. Like, all right, what's your favorite album? We're just gonna clip through your listeners here.
What was your fourth? I think there was a fourth.
One big thing, man. We end with like. I don't know. You've had a lot of travels. You've had a lot of journeys. You've had a lot of experiences, and it's a little bit reductive to say, "Tell me what they all mean," right? But like, if you could, like, hit me with some like big truism that you're like, "Man, I've lived it. I've seen it. I've done it," and you need to know, this.
Live free, dream far, trust Jesus.
Boom. There you go.
I was ready.
I could, for sure. Kent and I could talk for 6 days, man. So I look over and I'm like, wow. We could keep going.
Yeah. Hopefully other people feel that way. But
our listeners listen to the end. Yeah. It's pretty interesting.
Or until Coldplay.
Yeah, until that part. That's why we were wise to keep it till the end.
That. I knew you were going to say Coldplay. I was like, I will catch him at the end.
This is, I got to draw, it's Darth Vader going like, you were wise to keep this from me, Obi-Wan. Sorry, I just had to do it.
Have you watched Obi-Wan yet?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Is Jesus God?
Yeah.
Now, I will say Stranger Things has been, that's been my jam, but
William's catching up. I haven't seen the newest episode. He's catching up, and then we'll zoom.
You ready to leap over the table and attack me?
Uh-oh.
I've never watched Star Wars.
So my wife hasn't either. I tried to get her to watch episode 4, which probably
immediately scrolling.
I get it. Like, it's fine.
Yeah. I don't hate it. How can I hate it? I've never absorbed it.
Yeah.
It's just
it's not for everybody.
It's like they were instant ditch at the end. There'll be no
instant ditch. It's the end. It's exact opposite of instant ditch.
Good point. Yeah. Well, like normally we're like, hey, one big thing, and then drums on the way out. Now it's just like Star Wars.
War drums.
Yeah.
Sorry, but it's Friday evening, so
I've got work to do still. There's something about Star Wars is like so like rich with nostalgia to me. Yeah. When it comes on, I'm like, okay, I'll watch it again.
Right.
And I'm not a movie guy.
Yeah.
But there's not a lot. But when it's on, I'm like, oh yeah, this is awesome. I still love it. And all the side quests and new episodes and versions and filling in the blanks and extended universe. I'm like, I'm here for that.
Yeah.
I don't care. I don't care. I'll watch it.
Or drums.
More drums.
More drums.